concert. You're there to listen to the music. The musicians are there to entertain you, nothing else. I am the same way. I'm simply here to provide you with knowledge and perspective of individuals that know what it takes to live alone. I want you to make clear that this is a conceptual speech and not necessarily a step-by-step manual. So open your minds, broaden your perspective, and enjoy. I am an entertainer. I want to start off by asking you what made you sit here today. Do you need to move out? Have you moved out? Or are you just simply curious? This is important because I want to view this presentation from a particular perspective. And here it is. Remember the last time you had an argument with your parents? And remember the last one that involved you making a threat to move out of the house? Now, have you actually imagined this? Considered it? Perhaps even planned it? And then succeeded? Hi, my name is Abraham Shannon, and this is my story. You see, I'm like most of you, born in this country, went through the public school system, elementary, middle, high school, and then college. But then I came back. You see, I went to a 4-year university for a year before I came to this community college. Why? Because I wanted to get away from my parents and a constant nagging and pressure for me to do well in school. And of course, the culture barrier made it harder for me to communicate with them. So I didn't understand what education was for. I didn't see it as a privilege. I saw it as a duty that I had to fulfill, otherwise I would have life repercussions. I didn't think about my knowledge or the career, but in fact the grades that I had to sustain in order to satisfy my parents. So I felt trapped, and I wanted to escape. So when I got to the university, I felt this unfamiliar sense of freedom, but no consideration of responsibility. So at the end of the year, I ended up with a mediocre GPA, a huge debt, and 15 more pounds on my body. But most importantly, I didn't know what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. So I took the year off. I spent full time working at my father's martial arts academy, and I experienced life without school. But ironically, I learned a lesson more valuable than any textbook can offer. At our academy, a newcomer can't be a student automatically. They have to go through a set of trials. And why do we do this? For 2 reasons. Number one is for the academy to learn about the student. And number two is for the student to learn about the academy. And when the academy looks at the student, we look for 3 things. Number one is their interest level, how much they like it. And number two is their learning ability, how well can they learn martial arts. And number 3 is their behavior, the relationship between other students and the instructors. Now, our classes are hard. Like they mirror military culture and etiquette. Yes, sir, ma'am, is taught to the students. And these are ages from 5 to 13. Of course, we've had students that were too young, too old, kids with ADD, ADHD, and yet these kids are willing to commit for more than, not months or weeks, but years, 1 to 5 years in order to get, what? A belt, a trophy. Now let's bring back to those 3 things that the school looks for. Interest level, learning ability, and behavior. Can you guess which one's the most important? The desire, the want, is what makes the student. That is what we look for the most. And so these kids are willing to commit. But who knew that I, the instructor, didn't learn my own lesson? I didn't have my own trophy. I needed to find my own belt, my own desire, my own want. So at the end of the year, I knew what I wanted to do, and that's to go back to school. Now, what the trouble was, my father and I got into a disagreement about how I should spend my next year. With my academic history, he thought that it would be more appropriate to not go back to school, but travel to Korea and capitalize on my taekwondo skills competitively. I, on the other hand, wanted to get my bachelor's and become an entrepreneur so I can improve the academy itself. Finally, I realized that there was no agreement coming to an end, so I wanted to move out. So before, the reason why I found it hard to move out was because I was unwilling to face the unknown challenges in the outside world. I didn't want to leave my comfort zone in my own house. So how come so many of us find it so hard to move out, but more importantly, want to move out? One day, I was going across the internet and I found this blog post. Take a few moments to read what's on there. Okay? And this was the title. And this was the top comment. Now, what are these? These are called life skills. And these are skills that you learn through experiencing life. Now, how is this a problem or relate to our aspiration to move out? Well, you need these life skills. And please understand that we are the most entertained generation ever. We're literally choosing to live in each other's lives through social networking, blogging, tweeting, etc. Do you remember when video games used to have an end? Where there would be one objective, and if you finish that objective, you put down the Game Boy or leave the arcade and go outside to hug a tree or smoke grass or whatever. So as you can see, ever since the merger of global telecommunications and the entertainment industry, we spawned multiple distractions, multiplayer, global tournaments, and the most powerful distraction of them all, Netflix. Now, most of you might say, you're supposed to learn this along the way, or your parents are supposed to teach you. I agree. However, I believe there are solutions today that could have been applicable to the issues we had yesterday. For instance, the 99% in Occupy Wall Street, do you think they would have taken out those student loans if they knew about credit scores, or interest rates, or tuition rates? What about parents who come outside of this country? How can they possibly teach their kids about who to vote for and which political party to support? What about parents who work both jobs that can't spend time to teach their kids on any of these issues? Ask yourselves, when was the last time you had a conversation with your parents about any of these topics? What about children who don't have parents at all? So I want you to understand that there is a growing problem today, and that is lacking life skills. Now, some of you might say that money is the biggest issue. Let's look at some numbers. This is the tuition cost for 1 year on average in the United States for the past 25 years, from 1976 to 2010. Now, if you take a look, this is rising, and it doesn't look like it's going to stop. In fact, the rate of increase is increasing, so it's an exponential rise. How many of you are going to UConn? All right, good enough. So let's take UConn's tuition for 1 year, right? We're going to take UConn's tuition for 1 year. And we want to find out how many hours do we need to work in order to make up this kind of money in 1 year. So how many of you get $10 an hour? Good enough. So most of us get $10 an hour, hypothetically speaking, and we divide that with the total amount of money that we need to make. And so we get a really big number, right? The total amount of hours that we need to work. But this doesn't really mean anything yet. So let's find out how many days we need to work. So we need to determine how long each day we're going to work. How many of you do 6-hour shifts? Awesome, now we're actually getting somewhere. So 6-hour shifts, right? And we try to answer this question. So how many days we need to work throughout the year in order to make up 1 year of tuition? Last time I checked, there were 365 days in a year. So what this is telling me is that we need to work more than 1 year in order to get 1 year of education. So how does living ourselves come even fathomable to our minds if getting there seems financially impossible? Let me show you what I did. I simplified. In the 1900s, there was a psychologist at Columbia University named Abraham Maslow. He stole my name. And he studied the self-actualization of the human will, what motivated us to reach our full potential, what separated us from animals. And he came up with this triangle called the hierarchy of needs. And what this does is it organizes the human will from most important to least important, from the physiological needs to self-actualization at the top. Now here's the discovery. When I moved out, I did something called adaptation. And what I did was simplify my needs. When you move out, this is all you have to worry about. Each of these things are needs, and you can solve them in two ways. Number one is routinely, or number two, permanently. For example, breathing. Oxygen is free, so I'm pretty sure you're set permanently. But how about the end? Excretion, that's pooping and peeing. And so we have toilets, we have public bathrooms, bathrooms in your home, bathrooms in school. And you solve this need routinely, every day, 3 times a day, hopefully. So that's what we do. We simplify our needs and adapt once we start to live on our own. Now, once you worry about the basics, for example, the tuition problem we had before, once we have that problem and have prior knowledge, we can start to think about solving it. For instance, filling out a financial aid application or looking for scholarships. Now, this is what I do in any case, task, problem, project, even this presentation, in order to simplify what I need to do. The first, I give myself 3 questions. Number 1 is, what do I need? Number 2 is, what do I have? And number 3 is, how do I get the things that I need with the things that I have? For example, what do I have? Where do I live? The first question, what do we need? For example, when I was given a month to move out of my house, I thought about what I needed in order to live somewhere. So let's check about what we need in our household in order to live. Pretty basic, right? It's this kind of basic thinking that will help you understand this question. What do I need? Now, how do we even begin to look where to find these things, or a place to live when we first move out? And this brings us to our next question. What do I have? There are 2 things in this world that all people have, and that's the internet and motivation. I want to talk about the latter first because that's the most important factor for living on your own. If I were to ask you what your motivation is today, what would it be? Would it be power, fame, money, freedom, family? Think about truly what you want to do for the rest of your life. There was a philosopher in the 70s named Alan Watts who helped students answer this question. And he answered it with a counter question. What if money were no object? Think about that. What if money were no object? But the concept of currency didn't exist in the world. What would you do then? Would you travel? Would you paint? What would you do? Because if you think about it, if you choose a job that gets you a lot of money so you can live longer, you're doing that job because you don't want to, but yet you want to live longer doing that job. It makes more sense to live a short life doing what you like doing than a long life doing what you don't like doing. Because if you really think about it, doing what you like doing is something that you'll stick with, even though it's hard. And eventually, you become a master at it. And that's when you can charge a good fee for it. Maybe you can become famous. Your parents would be proud, you made money, and you did what you wanted to do. I'm a manager at YB World, the Marshall West Academy, and I was interviewing for a job. The first question I asked my interviewees is, give me a top-line analysis of my company. A better and simpler question would have been, why do you want to work here? So think about what you want to do for the rest of your life. And once you have that, you have what's called a dream. And once you have a dream, you can add a deadline, and that's called a goal. My goal is to make sure that young adults like us realize that we can do anything. Not be anything, do anything. Occupations are merely labeled. No one is born a lawyer or a doctor. Those occupations didn't come to exist until recently. The only way we can determine what we want to do in life is to make sure that we have basic life skills. And how do we get these life skills? Previously, I mentioned that global communication was a downfall of our attention span, right? The internet, Netflix. But have we really understood the power, the real power of the internet? Global communication, public access. Can you find a better way to distribute information? This is where I want to include Google. Google has changed the way we look up this information and access it. For example, society has transformed not just encyclopedias, but forums, blogs for us to answer our questions. It has literally transformed Google into an answering machine. Now, what do I mean by that? When I was looking for a place to live, I looked up places to live, and I got houses for sale or something like that. But when I typed in the actual question in my thought process, how do I find a place to live into Google? I looked up the first link and it was Yahoo Answers. Yahoo Answers, Wiki Answers, these are basically websites that make elementary school homework worthless. They will directly answer your question. For me, they just suggested that I look on Craigslist, and that's exactly what I did. So let's create our own answer machine for life skills. When you look on Amazon and look for an item, what's the first thing that you look at? The reviews. You look at the public opinion of the item. And why do we do this? It's because we trust the majority. And so Yahoo and Wiki Answers is the most reliable source we look for when we're looking for a question to an answer. The internet simplifies for us. So I created a web page. This is my project. This Facebook page is composed of all the issues that relate to living on your own. This can be tweeted, shared, blogged, etc. And what this creates is an opportunity for the public to make a source by the public for the public. And how do we develop this into a real, reliable source? This is where I introduce the cycle. We pose a question with this page. How do we live by ourselves? And we get a public response. Questions or answers by the public. And once we develop them and publish them once again, we understand that times are changing. Society is changing. And therefore, our answers are going to change. That's why we pose a new question constantly. And thus, we get our cycle. Now, most of you might question, what will motivate people to do this? Why would people do this? Who knows it's going to be a success? Let me tell you something about motivation. 20 years ago, Microsoft hired a team called Encarta. How many of you heard of Encarta? All right, good enough. So Encarta was an encyclopedia made by engineers, typists, schedulers, professionals. They were paid, they were on time, and they had all the right incentives. Recently, the same thing was done, except this time, the team was the world. If you compare these two companies, which one is the most successful, and which one was composed of what is thought to be the right team? So, let me wrap up. There is a reason why it seems hard to move out. It's because we simply don't want to. Why? It's because we're lacking life skills. So how do we solve this? Create a source made by the public for the public. And thus we can augment our skills, our life skills, and create our dreams into goals. And maybe these goals will start being the changes that we want to see in the world. So I'll ask you again, are you ready to move out? If so, what then? Thank you.